Welcome, everybody, to the Soul of the Unexplained. I am your host, Jim Kelgard, and today we are kicking off episode number 15, and we've got a real special treat for you. Regrettably, my awesome co host, Mr. Roger Stokes, is unable to join us today. He's unfortunately had some issues with his back, so he's at home recovering right now. But we want to extend our greatest wishes and hope that Roger recovers well and quickly and let him know that we're thinking about him. And we surely do miss him for this special edition of our podcast. But instead of Roger joining me, I've got three amazing friends of mine that are going to be helping us discuss what we have on the docket. And so, without further ado, I'm going to do a quick introduction to all of our guests here. And for the first one, we'll start with Mr. John Neiberger from the great state of Colorado. And John is a friend of mine. We met actually last year in Vernal, Utah during Phenomicon 2023, which, of course, is the awesome conference that is hosted by Uinta County in Utah. And of course, there's great speakers from, of course, the Skinwalker Ranch team and Expedition Bigfoot were there, and just all kinds of great stuff. It's like an amazing 4-day conference pertaining to all things unexplained and paranormal. So, John, say hello and tell us just real quick a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. And yeah, John Neiberger. I live in Denver. I'm a Denver Bronco fan, which makes we have an interesting rivalry going, with we can say very good friends, even though we're on complete opposite ends of this rivalry, which is great. But yeah, I'm a day job. I'm a network engineer. I'm a photographer. I'm a musician, which is another reason why Jim and I get along so well. Have no qualifications in this other than a lifelong interest in UFOs, paranormal, supernatural, and science in general. So, and of course, Skinwalker Ranch. Can't forget Skinwalker Ranch, and yes, Phenomicon was wonderful. I really had a great time. Very special people there, and yeah, meeting you, there were a couple of people I really hit it off well with, and Jim, we were like brothers from different mothers instantaneously. So yeah,
Absolutely. Despite the
right.
fact that I'm a Raiders fan and you're a
Yes,
Broncos fan, living proof that the rivalry can't keep us from being good friends. And
yes, you're the prodigal son then, right? Does that make you?
there you go. Well, and like I told you, back in the '80s, I was actually a big fan of John Elway, and in the '80s and the '90s, and I was actually cheering Denver on when they were in the two Super Bowls that they were in, where Elway led them to back-to-back victories. That was a
Mhm.
really cool thing to watch happen. Just don't tell my fellow Raider fans because they'll disown me.
Secret is safe with me.
Right. Right on. Well, welcome, John. We're happy to have you here. And also joining us is a familiar face to some of you that have been fans of the Soul of the Unexplained. A very dear friend of mine, hailing from the great state of Kentucky, Mr. Ron Hubbard Jr. And of course, he is no relation to the other Ron Hubbard of
Heard that a
Scientology
few
fame.
times.
But Ron, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself for those of our listeners that aren't familiar with you.
Well, okay, thank you, Jim. Like I said, I'm Ron Hubbard Jr., no relation to the famous L. Ron Hubbard. I've been asked that a few times in my life, obviously. So, but I am from Western Kentucky and been in Kentucky my whole life. So, I work for the Postal Service. I'm a postmaster. Also big into music with Jim. Jim and I have been friends now for I'd say around 6 years or so, and we're both, very much into music and with bands and things like that. So appreciate you having me on. And I am very new to this, so I'm still kind of learning as we go. So
Right on. Well, we're excited to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us, Ron. And last but certainly not least is yet another familiar face that fans of the Soul of the Unexplained are familiar with, and that is my very dear friend Mae, who actually last year did, I believe, 2 episodes of the Soul of the Unexplained with me when we were talking about the David Grush congressional hearings last July. So Mae hails from the great state of Texas, the Lone Star State. So, Mae, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Mae. I live in South Texas. I spend most of my time driving people around, and the rest of the time I make art, dig in the dirt, and listen to a lot of music. And sometimes I get around to writing about some of it. I enjoy doing that, but I hate deadlines. So when I do introduce myself to people, musicians that I meet at shows, because I go to a lot of shows, I usually tell them I'm a lazy music writer. So I like music. I might write about it when I can. And I really enjoy doing that when I do. I'm fairly new also to, I guess, the more of the history of the UAP phenomenon. And but I like to learn things. I like to know things. I like to find out about things. And I think I tend to approach things with a very common sense approach. And I'm a thinker. So if I talk to you about something, it's something I've probably thought pretty well out. And then of course I won't shut up. So that's me. And so that's why Jim and I get along so well. And of course, I'm looking forward to being Jim's co-host again with another little project that he has going on. And, you know, because that's always a lot of fun. But that's me.
Right on. Absolutely. And folks, I can tell you, you will not find two better ambassadors for independent music than either Mae or Ron. They are just two of the finest people that I know, biggest fans of music, particularly synth pop, which is my specialty. And yeah, Mae is going to be my co-host for the Soul of Synth Pop, which was the radio show that I did up until fairly recently. And we're going to be relaunching that soon. And Mae is going to be my co-host. And we talk to synth pop artists from all over the world and do little spotlights on them. And it's a lot of fun. So if you're into that kind of music and into that kind of thing, stay tuned for that. So speaking of soul, right? And Mae, I guess you could probably take note of the shirt that I'm wearing, Eminent Soul. And for those of you that don't know, Eminent Soul is the name of the music project that I did for roughly 10 years or so. Just ended that project last year. But today we're not talking about Eminent Soul, no, nor are we talking about the soul of synth pop. Instead, we are talking about the Soul Foundation, and that is soul spelled S-O-L, just like Eminent Soul. But the Soul Foundation is really kind of a neat little organization that has been put together by Professor Garry Nolan and Dr. Peter Scoffish. And it's kind of like this great, I guess what's the best word I can think of? It's a great conglomerate. I don't know if that's even the best word to
Think
describe it.
tank.
Think tank is another
Think tank.
great way to do it. But it's a great collective of some of the world's most renowned academics, scientists, physicists, astrophysicists, microbiologists, theologists, anthropologists, basically the folks that are at the very top of their field. This is an organization that has been organized to basically study the UAP or UFO phenomenon and try to be as transparent as they can in the research and investigations that they are doing. And just this past week, they uploaded a series of videos on YouTube. And if you go on YouTube, they have a fantastic YouTube channel for the Soul Foundation. And again, that's Soul spelled S-O-L, kind of like the Spanish word for sun, S-O-L, Soul. And they uploaded roughly a dozen or so videos from presenters at their very first conference, which was held. And again, folks, talk about coincidences and interesting synchronicities. Today is February 17th, and it is exactly 3 months to the day that the Soul Foundation held this conference that we are going to be talking about today. So how about that, guys? I mean, I don't know if any of the rest of you believe in those strange synchronicities and coincidences, but as my friend Jeff Freeman and Roger, and we always say there are no coincidences, right? So don't know what it means, but there you have it. So today, folks, we're going to be talking about not necessarily all of the videos that were presented because there's so many and just simply not enough time to go into depth on all of them. But we are going to be talking about probably 5 or 6 of the videos and just kind of give an overview of what was discussed, because some of the things that were actually revealed and shown at this conference and openly discussed there were a lot of firsts. There were a lot of photographs, excuse me, that, for instance, I had never seen, and some that I think a lot of people and the general public had never seen before. And some of that included materials that were from alleged UFO crashes that have been thoroughly analyzed by Dr. Garry Nolan and his team. So it was really cool to see that. So where we're going to start is one of the presenters was a gentleman by the name of Kevin Knuth, and he's a professor of physics. He's currently based out of SUNY Albany. Now, that's the State University of New York at Albany, and those of you that know me know that I'm a proud New Yorker from upstate New York, and I grew up not very far from Albany, so it was kind of cool for me to learn that Dr. Knuth was actually is currently teaching at SUNY Albany. But he gave a great presentation about the physics of the of UAPs, and what I really enjoyed about it was that Dr. Knuth really kind of broke down his presentation in a very easy to digest and a very easy to understand format for somebody like me who isn't a scientist and isn't a physicist, and being perfectly honest, math was not my strong suit in high school. But it was still a fantastic presentation. And one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting about Dr. Knuth's presentation was that he specifically went over the calculations. I think in particular, the Tic Tac incident, which of course happened back in 2004 with the USS Nimitz carrier group out in the Pacific Ocean, just off the coast of San Diego, if I'm not mistaken. And we've all heard the story about the encounter and how Commander David Fravor was one of the Navy pilots piloting an F-15, and he was called to go intercept this radar anomaly that had been showing up on this advanced radar system that the Navy carrier group had. And we know from all the behavior characteristics that this object, which has now been dubbed the Tic Tac, that it exhibited some really extraordinary flight characteristics. And among those things was this Tic Tac was roughly about the size of an F-18 itself. So let's say about 40 feet long or so, about the size of what your average school bus in the United States is. So pretty good sized. And it had no wings. It exhibited no visible means of propulsion. In other words, there were no visible contrails. There was no evidence of an engine or exhaust port out either end of this thing. It was cylindrical, completely smooth, and hence the description of it being of it looking like a Tic Tac. One of those white peppermint Tic Tac candies that we have. So among those characteristics, the physical characteristics of the Tic Tac, one of the other notable things was that the great speed that it had, and how it would go from a really high altitude down to just a couple of feet above the surface of the ocean in like a fraction of a second. Like I think he said 0.78 seconds. And so of course an object traveling let's say I think the demonstration that he gave was from a height of roughly 28,000 feet. And now again, I'm not a big math whiz, but I know that 1 mile is what, around 5,280 feet. So take 5,280 and divide that into 28,000, and that's got to be a height of just under 6 miles, right? About 5.5 miles maybe. So going from an altitude of roughly 5 miles down to the surface of the ocean in 0.78 seconds. Okay, that's less than 1 second. And so not just the speed, but the absolute, the G-force that that such an activity would have involved was just literally off the charts. And so Dr. Knuth, he calculated that the amount of G-forces that this Tic Tac object exerted would have been on the scale of 5,000 Gs. Now, to put that in perspective, he said that the wings on an F-35 would be ripped off at, I think it was 19 Gs or something like that. So 19 Gs versus 5,000 Gs. And a G force, for those that don't know, is the basically the speed of it's calculated against the estimated speed of gravity or something like that. It's like basically 5,000 times the speed of gravity. And I think human beings will pass out at what is it, like around, and don't quote me on this. I think I remember hearing one time that most humans will pass out at like 9 or 10 Gs, and it's
Mhm.
fatal at like uh 11. For some people it can be fatal at 10 or 11 Gs. I don't quote me for sure on that, but that's that's kind of the scale that we're talking about. So in other words, if this object had a human being inside of it piloting it, then at 5 Gs, that pressure, uh, if anybody was inside it by known our current technology, whoever was inside of that would have been, you know, completely crushed into nothingness against the walls of the craft, unless there, you know, some kind of protective bubble, if you will, around it. But 5,000 Gs are what one of the characteristics that Dr. Knuth was able to calculate. And he was also able to estimate that it was essentially traveling at a speed of 42,000 miles per hour, which basically what he said, that's spacecraft speed. There is nothing on Earth, as far as we're aware, that's either foreign adversary technology or our own country's technology that can produce an aircraft capable of reaching that speeds within Earth's atmosphere, let alone in outer space. That is what we would consider, according to Dr. Knuth, would be spacecraft speed. So um, he kind of intimated rather strongly that he felt that the data showed that this craft, whatever it was clearly not something made by a foreign adversary, nor was it something that appeared to be any kind of top secret or black ops technology of the United States. And one of the things that he points to as evidence of this is he talked about we've heard about these five observable characteristics of UAPs that Lou Elizondo and ATIP and the UAP task force have kind of come out with to talk about, you know, the different viewable characteristics of these UAPs. And so he said that these reports of UFOs or UAPs, he said these things are objects. They are, in fact, unidentified flying objects. And so that's why he referred to them as UFOs instead of necessarily UAPs. And even though a lot of people kind of, you know, interchange the two, but in this instance, we're talking about an actual object that was flying in the atmosphere. So, but he points to the fact that these flight characteristics are not something that has only been viewable since 2004 or even since 1990, 1980, 1970. These are craft that have exhibited really extraordinary flight characteristics, in some instances going back to the late 1800s. And he provided several examples of that during his presentation. So it was really kind of cool to have a college professor, a physicist, Dr. Knuth, um, present us with this amazing video and slideshow that showed exactly how he arrived at these calculations of what the speeds were that were involved and the G forces that these things would have pulled, and how there is truly no known way, as far as our current model of physics, that something like this would be some kind of Earth-based technology. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, no pun intended, he did not say, you know, that this thing could be interdimensional, or it could be some breakaway civilization technology, or he didn't come flat out and say extraterrestrial, but he did imply rather strongly that these objects, specifically the Tic Tac and the gimbal and the Go Fast, they exhibit characteristics that give the impression that it is not of this world and left it at that. And of course, that's open to interpretation. And naturally, a lot of people are going to jump to the what is known as the ET hypothesis. But there's also some people that say, well, maybe there is evidence that these things are interdimensional in nature, or maybe they are from a breakaway civilization that has always resided here on planet Earth. Some people refer to them as crypto-terrestrials or ultra-terrestrials. But did any of the three of you get a chance to watch the video presentation by Dr. Knuth?
That was one that I watched most of, and physics is always something I've always been interested in, even though I'm not strong in math, like I'd like to be, but yeah, I mean, you really kind of covered it there. Just the thoughts that I had watching that were that obviously this, and I kind of lean towards the point of view that this is an interdimensional or extra dimensional thing that we're dealing with, and I think the technology here is showing that that they're obviously using something that cancels out that effect that it would have internal to the craft, because you're talking about the G forces, also the friction of the object moving through the atmosphere, because you were saying 28,000 feet, which Mount Everest is 29,000 feet. So just put that in scale. Mount Everest is the highest point on the planet above sea level, and just to go that distance in less than a second would also heat up the object too, because there's molecules of air, of oxygen, nitrogen, whatever in the air. So there's technology at play there to cancel out the friction, the G forces, to have that instant start and stop type thing.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really stood out to me during his presentation, or kind of after I finished watching it, was very clear to me, and it wasn't, I already believed this before I watched the video, but one of the big takeaways is that whatever these objects are, the Tic Tac, the gimbal, the Go Fast, they are very real objects. They are, um, these are not illusions. These are not hallucinations. These are objects that were seen not just by eyewitnesses at relatively close range, speaking of Commander Fravor, who gave sworn testimony under oath before Congress this past July, as did Ryan Graves, who was another pilot that saw another UFO on the other side of the country, in the Atlantic side of the ocean. So these objects are undeniably very real, and not just because of the eyewitness testimony, but they were shown to be, they had signatures on multiple sensor platforms, on radar, on thermal imaging. And one of the other things that I thought was really interesting, Ron, and tell me if you picked up on this as well, but he also talked about how there were USOs, which of course stands for unidentified submerged objects, or as we've heard of these five observables, transmedium travel.
Medium, yeah.
Exactly. So he talks about a story that actually, I believe it was in New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken, where a ship in the New Zealand Navy, or maybe it was the Australian Navy, but it happened off the coast of New Zealand. And there was an object that was detected by sonar by this Navy ship, and the object that was detected in the ocean was, I think he said they estimated it to be about 800 feet wide or 800 feet long or something like that, and it closed a distance of 20. It's like 20 or 28 kilometers. So we're talking several miles in a matter of like 14 seconds or something like that. I mean, really insanely fast time, and underwater. And the thing that he said, that as if that wasn't extraordinary enough, and I think he calculated the speed would have had to been right around 14,000 miles per hour underwater. So let that sink in. No pun intended. Thank you, folks. I'll be here all week. Try the veal. But No, not only was this thing really fast underwater, but he talked about that sonar technology is based off of pressure waves underwater, and that's how they're able to tell roughly the size of an object and the speed of an object and the location of an object. And so this thing, even though it was traveling at over 14,000 miles per hour by his estimate and calculation, but this thing was still creating a pressure wave of some kind underwater. So it wasn't uh, it's just another one of those things of, gosh, how is this possible? How are they able to accomplish this? Because the amount of resistance in water versus the atmosphere, you are talking two vastly different types of pressure and two
Mhm.
vastly different types of well, medium,
Drag.
if you will,
Mhm.
So the fact that these things are not only able to move at extraordinary speeds in the atmosphere, but they are also apparently able to move underwater with an equal amount of extraordinary speed, faster than anything that we're aware of that can move underwater, whether in the natural world or manufactured, man-made world. So um, it was really kind of cool, I think, to see Dr. Knuth break this down and give us this information. And he also showed during his presentation several photographs of UFO encounters throughout the world. I think uh, the United States and Japan, Canada, New Zealand. I mean, really compelling photos that were actually shot on film. Some of them, because a lot of them go back many years before digital photography was even a thing. So it was kind of cool to see all this. Um, and John or May, did either of you get
Mhm.
to watch any of his presentation?
Don't think I got to watch his. His was next on my queue, and I didn't get to that one. But yeah.
Yep. I did watch this one. I thought it was fascinating. And Ron already talked a lot about it. You've got clearly whatever these things are, they are, at least in this case, an object of some sort. They're not just visual. They are showing up on different sensors. They are generating some type of heat. They're showing up on heat detecting infrared. They're showing up on radar. They that's fascinating enough. They're visual and showing up on different sensors. So you have multiple confirmations, multiple eyewitnesses. But then you have what Ron was talking about, the apparent complete lack of friction, and the fact that these things, whatever these are, they have a advanced propulsion of some variety that clearly we've never seen before. Nothing on the planet Earth behaves this way, and they completely disregard inertia and momentum. It's almost as if they just are traveling,
Mhm.
not being, not using propulsion to get from A to B like we would in a continuous line. It's like they suddenly just are appearing where they need to go. It's fascinating and mind-boggling. But if that's kind of how they operate, then maybe that explains the transmedium capabilities as well.
Mhm.
Maybe the medium just doesn't matter because
Yeah.
they're not experiencing friction. So it doesn't matter if they're, traveling through the air, through the water, whatever, empty space. Maybe it literally does not matter because that's just not how they operate. But it boggles my mind. Yeah.
And you're
I
not
don't know what else to say, but I just I'm like, I would love to know what this is.
Yeah, and you're not alone in having your mind boggled. I mean, it just it astounds all of us, and it astounds, I think, anybody who really takes the time to look at it and to not only watch the videos, but to look at the data that they were able to extract. Now, in all fairness, not all of the data from the radar from the Nimitz carrier group was made available. There's still, all that we know is that somebody from the government came in and secured all the radar data. So we don't have access to that yet. Although I
Oh,
do
we know
have,
who has it though.
we know who has it, yes, but it's not available to the public just
Right.
yet. So basically, uh, like you were saying, John, and you brought up some excellent points. I really enjoy the fact that you mentioned that there's appears to be inertia canceling technology. And what a game changer that would be, right? If there's some technology out there that allows us to completely cancel or nullify the effects of gravity and inertia. I mean, that's a game changer right there, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those
Mm.
things that um, because the world that we live in right now in the in 2024, propulsion, there's
Mhm.
certain things that you have to be able to maintain um, flight, to achieve flight. You have to be able to either uh, create circulation of air around the craft and have an airframe that allows airflow to go a certain way, and then you have to have some manner of propulsion, either internal combustion engine or jet propulsion of some kind, where there's that classic. And Ron, correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I think you know more about this than I do. But Newton's, I think it was Newton that put the law for every
Yes.
action there's an equal and opposite
Yeah.
reaction.
Well, the one that you're talking about is an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless there's a force acting against it. So that's basic Newton's laws right there. And that with the inertia canceling thing is what I was trying to say earlier about that instantaneous start and stop. I mean, this thing literally stops on a dime. I mean, nothing that we have does that. I mean, you can't just go moving and just stop instantaneously with no residual motion left over. That's what inertia is. So these things are able to totally negate that.
Exactly. And if I'm not mistaken, you're dealing with both positive and negative G's
Mhm.
with both the instantaneous acceleration and the instantaneous uh, cessation of movement. I guess is what you call it, like you said. Starting and stopping on a dime. The object in motion stays in motion, or as we Raider fans call it, Bo Jackson or Marcus Allen. But anyway, all joking aside, though, it's a very that's part of what our current understanding of physics is based off of, is those principles. And so that's why these characteristics that we see are really extraordinary. And you get all these debunkers that say, well, it's not really, there was nothing extraordinary here. The pilots weren't really seeing what they thought they saw. You have one prominent debunker whose name we will not mention, who is not even, an expert in the field of physics or science. And he says, well, it's likely a bird, and it's just a strange optical effect that creates what you think you're seeing, but it's not really what you're seeing. And it's like, really, guy, that's the best that you can do, and you think that explains away, all this stuff here. So, um, and while we're at it, let's just kind of talk about the difference between being a skeptic and being a debunker, because there
Mhm.
is a difference between the two.
Right.
And you guys can opine on what you think of this, but my view on it is a skeptic is really kind of what we all should try to be, which means a skeptic is somebody who is by nature has an open and curious and inquisitive mind, isn't necessarily going to believe things at face value. They're going to want to see data. They're going to want to see proof. They're going to want to see something other than, wow, did I really see what I thought I saw, kind of thing. And so a skeptic is naturally curious. They are willing to keep their mind open to, okay, maybe this is something from another world or from some other advanced civilization. But maybe there's also something perfectly mundane and prosaic to explain it away. But either way, I'm not going to say until I know more.
Mhm.
Whereas the debunker has already made their mind up before they even, you know, look into the data and look into whatever the particular object or incident is. There's somebody that goes into it very close-minded. They've got a predetermined outcome. No matter what you show them, they're gonna absolutely not believe whatever you say that it may or may not be. They've already made up their mind. They're closed-minded, and that's just the that's just the nature there. And debunkers tend to be a little more, how shall I say this politely? Being a New Yorker, it's I have to watch my language because this is a family friendly show most of the time. But these debunkers specifically that are within this particular realm are not very kind. They're not very nice, and they're very condescending, to put it nicely. That's kind of that's probably the most friendly way that I can put a spin on it.
Yeah.
Whereas skeptics, again, people vary from one person to another depending on their personalities, but the general nature of a skeptic is somebody who is, again, open-minded. They're willing to, take a look at all the data and make their own determination after they've had a chance to look at all of the data. And so that's why this whole topic is fraught with people that are separated really into two tribes. There's the people that believe, oh, it's absolutely categorically aliens, this little green men, whatever you want to call it. And then you've got the people over here that say, well, there's no such thing, and this is all just nonsense and a waste of time, and there's perfectly rational explanations. And no, this tic tac was nothing extraordinary other than maybe somebody invented something that's a little faster than what we've already got in our nation's military inventory. I mean, there's really such a wide chasm, and it's really kind of a good cross section of what our society in the United States lately anyways become. You've got one group of people, it's all so tribalistic anymore. You either agree with this side or with this side, and there's no in between. You're either with us or you're against us. And that's kind of the mentality of not just society in general, it seems, but of particularly this UFO/UAP community. And so again, that's why I really enjoyed the Soul Foundation coming out with these videos. And so, any thoughts on that from any of you?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it like this, science itself is, a process of questioning. And when you make a discovery or whatever, if you're in science, it goes through, you have to take it to basically a room full of skeptics, which is the scientific community, and it does this peer review process. And other scientists look at it, and it's not announced that it's been discovered, until other people confirm what you have discovered. And they talked about that, in some of the introductory videos, where, what they're trying to do with this is have deep vetting and peer review of what is being, brought out, so that it's not just, being taken at face value like that. So that is, to me, they are doing this in a scientific way, because science is questioning. Science is, you observe things, you form a hypothesis, and then if you make a discovery, and you take it out to the community, then you're going to have the other people going, okay, let me try to do that and see what I come up with. And this one incident, this Tic Tac incident, was covered by some of the other speakers. I think we're going to talk about some of them, but had their own take on it too, that I thought was very interesting. But that to me, the healthy skepticism is part of the scientific process.
Absolutely agree. May, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, just like Ron just said, which is a really important part about what science actually is. So many people feel that it's a set of beliefs. And so you always hear I believe in science. Well, I believe in science too, because it's not a set of beliefs. It's a process by which we explain the world around us. So we have to believe that we have not reached the pinnacle of scientific discovery, and we're still doing things, we're still learning things, and we're still disproving things that we before thought we had proved. So I think for that, it's to have a healthy understanding of what science is, and we've seen this since the beginning, with Copernicus and Galileo, and arguing with the established church on what are we going to believe. So I think you have like this group of skeptics that and one of the things that what I listened to, what they talked about, I thought, these paradigm shifts that people are going to have when things are actually come out and undeniable. When something becomes undeniable, the skeptics how are they going to handle that? I mean, I can understand. No, I'm sorry. The skeptics will handle it. It's the debunkers that won't be able to. And so I think that's I refer to those kinds of people as Dunning-Kruger poster children. So and sorry, someone's already told me they want to use that as a song name, so that's taken. but that's pretty much what it is. It's that refusal to think that there's anything more than what you've got in your own little head. There's so much more out there. And that's why we have so many people in different disciplines looking at this, because it's very difficult for one person to really have a handle on the knowledge of every different aspect of this.
Absolutely. Completely agree. John,
Yep.
what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I echo what they said, and science itself is a skeptical process. But I think the difference between, I think the correct term, the correct usage of skeptic versus the debunker. Some people refer to a debunker as a skeptic, but I think I treat skeptic as that should be kind of be your default position. But I think the debunkers start with their minds already made up. A skeptic, or anyone that's curious with some scientific or intellectual curiosity, will make observations in the world and say, huh, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. You start collecting data, you make some hypotheses, you construct some tests, you perform your tests, and you just keep repeating this process and say, okay, let's make some new observations. And you follow the data, right? That's what this guy was talking about. Follow the data. You don't necessarily have to make, in fact, it's better not to make any assumptions about it. Just follow the data. And that's what's frustrating to me about the debunkers, is they kind of go at it backwards. They're like, we already know you didn't see what you think you saw, so therefore you must not have seen what you saw, right? Which is, let's just admit it, that's moronic. That is a horrible way to proceed. And I think there's also, we have to be honest with ourselves. So there's a little bit of a danger the other way. Some of us are, once you start believing in, or you open your mind to various things, you might start making assumptions that the data doesn't support. You might get a little ahead of your skis, as they say. So I think there can be a danger of going both ways. But I think a great default position is follow the data. You're always going to be safe if you just follow the data, follow the science. I don't know what else, what else to say. That's the preferred position. And debunkers don't do that, and it drives me crazy. Gets me wound up.
Exactly. And I think one of the tactics that debunkers like to use is not only attack the data, but attack the person who's presenting the data. And that's just it's an age-old tactic, and it goes to even in realms outside of this particular UFO UAP topic. It goes towards pick any topic you want to, whether it's politics, religion, you name it. There's always going to be people that, like you said, they go into a debate or an argument with their mind already made up, and nothing that you say, nothing that you do, none of the data or the proof that you show is going to change their mind, and you're wrong, and that's just simply the way that the ball bounces, and that's all there is to it. End of discussion. And so what we have to do when we come across debunkers, and you can tell pretty quickly whether you're dealing with somebody who is skeptic or debunker because of those things. And the only advice that I would say, like you said, John, and you brought up an excellent point, it gets me wound up really, really, really hard too. And my instinct is, of course, I want to just completely, cut them down and, go show them the ugly side of Brooklyn, as it were. But, the best thing to do is just take the high road and just keep your eyes and your energy focused on things that, move you in the right direction, in a positive direction, which is why I'm glad to see the Soul Foundation doing things in the manner in which they are. And they've made it a multidisciplinary type of organization that we talked about in the beginning, where it's not just scientists. You've got anthropologists, and I guess technically an anthropologist is a kind of scientist, but multiple disciplines, theology, anthropology, biology, and aerospace engineering, you name it. They're really making sure they get as wide ranging of a field of experts and academics that they can get. And I think that's only going to benefit all of us in the long run. So all of you, thank you very much for your input on that. So before we move on to the next one, just kind of the bullet points to take away from Dr. Knuth's presentation is that it was just really fantastic to see some actual calculations from a physics professor and just kind of show us that his assertion is that these objects are undeniably just that. They are physical objects and they are not hallucinations. They're not trickery of light. It's not swamp gas, but they are real objects. And that kind of lays the groundwork from where we go from here. So the next video presentation we'll talk about was given by Mr. Christopher Mellon. And Mae, you actually touched upon it a few moments ago. And Christopher Mellon's background, let me put my 4 eyes back on here and read a little bit about Christopher Mellon. But Christopher Mellon was the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence and Staff Director of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And he served under multiple presidential administrations in both the executive and legislative branches of the United States government. So this is a guy who truly is an expert on what we would call national security. And so his presentation was titled "The Potential Consequences of Disclosure." And so, Mae, you mentioned in your comments just a few moments ago about how there are some people in the world that when they find out what the quote unquote truth is about all of this, and that's, I think we're all of the same mind that there is a great deal of substance to a lot of these allegations regarding other civilizations of non-human origin, be they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or breakaway civilization, whatever description you wish to ascribe to them. There is a lot of substance to the belief that these things really do exist and that these things are here, they've been here, and they've been here for a long period of time. So the great question is, how are these people, how are the citizens of the United States, how is the rest of the world going to react when the truth comes out about the origin of these craft and the beings that are responsible for building them and operating them, and learning, who are they, where do they come from, and more importantly, why are they here? And so Christopher Mellon talks about how we really have to take that into consideration whenever we talk about disclosure. Now, before we get started, I want to ask each one of you, and we'll start with Mae. Mae, what are your thoughts on disclosure? Are you in favor of it, or are you in favor of a very slow, very measured disclosure?
Well, I think it was interesting that you assigned me that one, because I know in the past we've talked about my association with my husband having served in the military. I am very used to the concept of hurry up and wait. I am very accustomed to knowing that there are things that are above my pay grade that I don't need to know. And I'm okay with those because I have the confidence that there are people who have our best interests, in mind. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are abusing their power and being, secretive and everything. But I think that as a whole, our human population, we probably couldn't handle a lot of the stuff that they would disclose. I think that I am good with knowing what I need to know. He did mention, we would like to know if there's a threat, because then we could prepare for it. But because they have no knowledge of it, there's nothing they can really do at this time. So I'm of the mind that I can wait. I've got so many other things I have to deal with, interdimensional beings or aliens that are attacking us in, next year. That can wait until, it's, we can jump off that bridge when we get to it.
Right on. John, how about you?
You know, I kind of go back and forth. I think right now I'm leaning toward being in favor of disclosure.
Mhm.
Although it's one of the other videos, it's Colonel Karl Nell said something along the lines of disclosure is a process, not an event.
Exactly.
So we might already be in the process of disclosure, and maybe we have been for decades. It's just
Yeah, I think we are.
little bits and pieces come out. But to what Mae said, it's hard to have an answer to that until you know what the answer is, right? If the answer is, yeah, we're being visited by extraterrestrials, maybe we're kind of prepared for that. If the answer is we actually co-inhabit Earth with some interdimensional beings made out of energy that can occasionally materialize, and that's what we've been seeing this entire time, that's maybe a little bit stranger. Or what if the answer is this is actually something that predated us? Maybe we're the aliens and they've been here the entire time. There's so many different potential answers. It's really hard to say, but I still think I am right now leaning more toward being in favor of disclosure. Just tell us what you know. Even if you don't really know what it is, at least give us the unclassified stuff. Just tell us what you know. We can figure it out from there. Maybe that's not the right answer, but that's kind of where I am right now.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thanks. And Ron, how about you?
Well, I'm definitely of the mindset that I think disclosure is necessary and it is a process. And you and I were just talking about this earlier this week is, there is a natural distrust of the government in this country. And I
You're
think
kidding
that
me.
and I think what needs to happen is it needs to be something done and where you have elements of the government and of the scientific community that present this to where it's not just some government person that has talking points that tells us what he wants us to know. It's presented, you know it, like I said, a process to where you know that people can understand, because if you don't, sooner or later, with the way technology is and things, people being able to see things on their own is things are going to happen where, the horses are going to get out of the barn and you're not going to be able to, get them back in. So I think that the government and the scientific community needs to be more proactive in presenting, saying, okay, here's what we know at this point. This is what we're dealing with, and we want you to know. That way, if something does happen, everybody's not just reacting like, well, how long have you known? What have you known? This and that. And I think it needs to be, joint effort between the government and the scientific community.
Right on. I tend to agree. I think uh, as John said, I think disclosure really, if we're going to give it a specific starting point, I think it probably started on December 17th, 2017, when the New York Times published that fantastic article by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal
Mhm.
about the existence of ATIP, the top secret Pentagon program that investigated UFOs. And so I think that was kind of the beginning of what we would call at least the modern era of disclosure. And I think it's only been gathering momentum since then. And it reached kind of a fever pitch last year when David Grush, uh, David Fravor, and Ryan Graves testified before Congress, and some pretty extraordinary things were offered up under oath during that congressional hearing. And it's the ball is still rolling forward. We had certain elements of the UAP Disclosure Act that were actually passed into law, and we'll get to that in just a minute, talking about the presentation that Karl Nell gave during the Soul Foundation conference. But just some really extraordinary things that are going on. So what I'd like to do right now is read a couple of excerpts from Chris Mellon's presentation, and I want the three of you to kind of make note of some of these things and see if any of these things in particular stand out to you. Um, he starts off by saying, in regards to uh, his talk, he's speaking again from a national security perspective, and he says that Congress is currently uh, investigating extraordinary claims of the existence, and this is my own interpretation right here, of Manhattan Project level top secret programs involving the recovery of alleged UFOs and their occupants, both of which, again, are allegedly of non-human origin. And Mellon then says that this news would undoubtedly be the most shocking, profound, and transformative discovery in human history. Yet Congress has yet to hold specific hearings to assess the potential impact such revelations may have if they are deemed to be factual. And he says, don't ask the question if you aren't prepared for the answer. And so he goes on further to say, one of the only things we can say with certainty at this point is that unless this intelligence proves to be angelic, which is not what our military is reporting, disclosure would undeniably frighten, if not terrify, many segments of the world population. Moreover, what if disclosure precipitated a change in the behavior of an alien civilization because they no longer had an incentive to remain elusive? There is a well-known, long-standing problem within the U.S. government of sharing intelligence information. It happened pre-World War II with Pearl Harbor and in the events that unfolded on 9/11. This lack of willingness to share intelligence between government agencies persists today, and in some ways, I think anyway, has only gotten worse. And it's also worth noting that Christopher Mellon brought both Eric Davis to Congress in 2019, as well as playing a role in getting David Grush to testify before Congress last year. And Mellon says that he began wondering if perhaps his actions would result in an avalanche of sorts regarding further disclosure of the issue. He then says, we are not dealing, at least not exclusively, with an intangible interdimensional presence that has, for centuries, been seeking to subtly influence human affairs. Something along these lines could be happening. It's a fascinating issue, but our military is encountering intelligently controlled, solid objects invading restricted military airspace, sometimes flying in formation. In many cases, they're emitting radiations in the 1 to 3 and 8 to 12 gigahertz range. Multiple credible reports indicate these objects have rendered segments of our nuclear deterrent inoperable. In other recent cases, they're jamming radars on fighter aircraft. We also have multiple cases of near mid-air collisions and other cases involving serious injuries to military and civilian personnel. Indeed, this is an area of research for Dr. Nolan and the Soul Foundation. I'm here to support Garry's and Peter's efforts to advance the scientific study of UAP, but I also recognize that as much as it might like to, we cannot let the government divest itself of this issue. So, out of all that stuff that I just read, what were some of those key points that stood out to you, Mae?
Well, I guess did you ask me or May? I'm sorry.
Well, if you want to start, Ron, go ahead. Then
Oh,
I'll come back to Mae.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, May. I thought I didn't hear what you said there. Go ahead.
Okay,
Rock, paper, scissors.
there you go.
There you go.
Well, I had to
Right.
mute my microphone because I had a dog getting upset about a kid walking through the house. So the things that absolutely, the one thing that stuck out to me very first was the unless this intelligence proves to be angelic. I thought, first of all, if that's what it were, you would have a huge part of the population who would be rejoicing. And then you would still have another part of the population that would range from skeptic to debunking. And then you have, I see so much uproar with just that in the first place. Then you have the people who are going to panic. But that one I found really interesting. And he did mention also how back with the congressional hearing in July, there were so many people, and we saw it in the social media and anticipating, what are we going to learn? What's going to be disclosed? What's going to be released? And so many people were expecting to hear all the bombshells, and there really weren't. There were just pretty much admitting that this data is being collected, that we have credible witnesses that we're starting to take seriously. But like John said, that process, that disclosure is a process, and it kind of eases us in. And then by introducing these experts, these academics, we're starting to see more people that you can take seriously. It's not just the tinfoil hat wearers that are saying these things. It's the physicists, it's the psychologists. The one guy was the Bible historian. That's the theology. That's the other person I listened to. So this is as far as disclosure. I do like that he also said, what president wants to have that press conference? It's going to be really big for when that final thing does have to be disclosed, because of course we don't know. He also mentioned that we don't know what other world leaders are thinking of when we're having conflict. We don't know what they're going to do. And so that was the other thing. And then the other thing that stood out to me was using the word when he talked about Pearl Harbor and 9/11, that there was data being collected. There was chatter, as they call it. There was, people were hearing stuff, but they were paralyzed by stigma. And this is what we're seeing with the witnesses, the observers who are finally coming forward and speaking out, is that they are no longer feeling paralyzed by that stigma when they were before. You kept it to yourself. You couldn't believe your eyes because it couldn't physically possibly be real. So therefore, or you could get grounded. So that's why people just haven't spoken up. So let me see, look at my notes. But then the other thing, the reluctance to release information, the government cannot limit itself to pristine scientific information, because you have, again, the Tic Tac moving at supersonic speed without making a sonic boom. Well, that just doesn't make sense, but it's there, and it was observed, and it was seen on radar. It was seen, firsthand. Those kinds of things. I think he says basically you're questioning the limitations of human reporting, but that's what you have, and the humans that are reporting it in this case are coming forward, and they're very credible people. So the other thing that I had really struck me is he talked about the precedents in, I didn't make good enough notes, but he talked about Sputnik. And he said, so the whole thing with Sputnik and why we got afraid, why we got really concerned about it all of a sudden, is because now we're like, oh, the Russians are getting ahead of us. We can't let them do that because we're America. And so, but in that spawning the space race, it also led to further collaboration and advances in technology. So that's one positive example of that disclosure, of us becoming aware of others out there being maybe more technologically advanced than us. But he says that, of course, the downside is when we've seen contact with less advanced civilizations, it doesn't usually end well for the less advanced. And the example he gives, of course, is the Europeans coming to America and the indigenous, populations being affected by disease, and then also having the psychological and cultural devastation that it has on them. And you really have to consider that in this case, we are the less technologically advanced. And so then you have, the worry and the panic that what's going to happen to us? What are the intentions of these other beings, of this other civilization? So those are the things that I took from him, from his talk. Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. Ron, how about you?
Okay, yeah, his presentation was really something. It was a bit ominous, I thought.
Definitely.
He talked really fast, and I wish he'd used maybe like a PowerPoint or something, but he didn't. But really, he was very, very direct about a lot of things he said, and about the classified stuff and that he mentioned about, disclosing, a lot of that was said in, David Grush's testimony, but he was like, that's classified. I could tell you in a skiff, I can't tell you out here, that kind of thing. And he alluded to kind of the same thing, is why a lot of the big quote bombshell things weren't said, but a lot of the things that, that he mentioned, especially like, the angelic thing, I just really, the other thing I picked up on was, how he mentioned how, we've got, serious, conflicts going on now in the world, and that he, in his view, that something like this, disclosing might be a path towards helping to unify the world against an external threat, supposedly, if there was greater cooperation between the world governments and things, which I thought was, pretty amazing to say something like that. But this guy was really serious, being a government person and everything. He was very serious, and that was, one of the more kind of surprising talks that I heard. So.
Yeah, I would agree. John, what did you have any takeaways from that you
Yeah,
wanted to mention?
that just made me think of what was Reagan's quote? He talked
Yeah,
about it was like, how soon would we get over our petty squabbles and the things that bother us here if we had to band together against some other external threat,
exactly. He said that in '87, addressing the United Nations. He that's pretty
Mhm.
good paraphrase of what he said. So yeah.
Yeah. And one of the quotes you mentioned initially was, what if disclosure were to trigger a response by whatever this is? And that's an interesting question, because Lou Elizondo has brought that up before a couple of years ago.
Right.
He was in one of his many videos where he's giving people things to think about. He's
Breadcrumbs,
like,
you're
I'm
right.
not really saying anything. I'm just giving us some things to think about, right? Just
I'm not
ponder this.
saying, but
Right. I'm just kind of saying, right? In the
yeah.
way he does with the hat pulled down.
Mhm.
But no, that's an interesting question. And that also, I guess, in a way, the answer to that affects disclosure, but it's hard to know what to think. Some people think the government does know a lot more about this than they're saying, and that they kind of know what's going on. And there are others that are like, no, they have lots of data. They don't have the slightest idea what's actually going on, what's behind the scenes. So from a national security perspective, I don't know what that means. Does the president someday come out and say, yeah, we've got all this data. We've been seeing this stuff for years. Yes, a lot of the stuff that you've heard is true. We don't know what it is. They seem to be able to travel at any speed they want. They can make you see and think and believe and experience something that didn't actually happen. They can play with your mind. They can make you remember things that didn't happen, or they seem to have unlimited capabilities, and we don't know what they are. Thank you and good luck. What are they supposed to do?
Right.
Right. Or maybe it's the opposite, but from a national security perspective, like more of what Christopher Mellon was talking about, it really gets into some weird questions. Because there's going to be aspects of the defense establishment, or at least maybe more Congress than the people who kind of know but don't really know. They might be thinking, these are near peers, these are foreign adversaries, or they're just balloons or whatever. But some of the other more exotic stuff, yeah, that's probably just the Russians, it's the Chinese, something like that. And maybe that's true. It's probably not true. Based on what we know, that's probably not true. But they would have to consider that. But that goes back to, they need to be having hearings. They need to listen to David Grush and all these guys, Ryan Graves, David Fravor, and all the other people that are talking to them, and start conducting hearings, get some of this stuff out into the open, and start answering some of these questions.
I completely agree, and all three of you touched upon really amazing points, and I'll just add my 2 cents before we wrap up Christopher Mellon's talk. But I was really impressed about how he said that there's definitely a dark side, a dark connotation to this disclosure. It's really truly um, unknown territory. Now, again, this is all operating under the presumption that there is at least some significant threads of truth to a lot of these claims. And so far, there has been nothing that has stood out where anybody has been able to categorically disprove, beyond the shadow of a doubt, what David Grush has alleged, or a number of the other ones. And of course, as you said, John, uh, we have we have data from multiple sensor platforms as well as direct eyewitness contact with human beings. And when you've got that kind of data, when you've got military pilots who are trained observers, these you don't get more professional than our nation's fighter pilots. These are the men and women that are literally tasked with defending our nation. And if you honestly think that these pilots didn't see what they thought they saw with their own eyes, let alone what their gun cameras and their thermal imaging and then the Aegis radar system that was on the USS Princeton as part of the carrier group for the Nimitz, then you just don't live in the what I would call the real world. If that's the kind of belief that you have, that this is all just, perfectly mundane and prosaic explanation, because that went out the window a long time ago. So there is clearly something to this. And I think that the government um, is telling the truth when they say they don't know necessarily what these things are or where they come from. And I think there's probably some truth to that. Nevertheless, I would not be surprised if there are some people within the government or defense contractor world that do know some of the pieces of the puzzle that the US government writ large do not know the answers to. And so that's when it's going to get really interesting, is when it gets to the point to where, because really all that the president or somebody has to say is, folks, we're not alone. We don't have anything other specific that we can share with you at this time, but we can tell you we are not alone. And I think that information, that statement right there, for starters, I don't think it would really surprise that many people. I really don't. Um, Now, naturally, there's going to be the people that just simply, for whatever reason, their worldview or their spiritual view or their just their general belief is that such things are only in the realm of comics books and science fiction and fiction novels. So to have them make that transition from, these are things that are essentially make believe and the subject of fantasy, but now here it is staring me in the face, it's real. That's going to be a day of reckoning for some people that is going to come with some extreme difficulty. And as Christopher Mellon mentioned, and as May and I talked about in one of our previous podcast episodes, there are some people I think that are going to be in a good position to accept it. I think there's a lot of people that already have accepted that it's a very real likelihood, if not outright truth. And you're going to have some people that are going to not know what to do, because again, their religious view, their worldview, their political view, what have you, cannot accommodate that big of a jump. For some people, evil Knievel wouldn't attempt a jump like that. For those of you that are old enough to get the, the evil Knievel reference, but
No, I don't get it. I get
yeah, right, yeah, young fella there, but
Perhaps I need to break into the Viva Knievel theme song.
oh, there we go. But yeah, this is one aspect of the quote unquote disclosure that a lot of people don't really take into account. And even though it might be safe to say that the four of us are ready for some kind of a disclosure to come to us, and I think all four of us, it's safe to say we believe that there is potentially something else out there other than us in the universe, and it may very well be here on this planet, or is continually visiting this planet, or has visited the planet in the past. Any of those scenarios, I think I'm comfortable saying we probably all four of us agree with that to some extent. but there are several people out there, not just the United States, but in the world that just, are they really going to be ready for it? Can they handle the proverbial truth, as Jack Nicholson's character on A Few Good Men is so famous for saying. Um, and I think there's that has to be taken into account. And that cannot be taken lightly, the fact of the impact that this kind of information is going to have on some people. For some people, it's going to be, as Christopher Mellon said, the most transformative and profound experience in human history. And for other people, that's going to be the day that their world ended. And that they just simply, because there are religions out there, not just in the Christian denominations, but there are religions out there that do not allow for the existence of something greater than man, other than God, or whoever their particular deity happens to be. And you get that within Christianity. You get that within a lot of other belief systems and spiritual belief systems throughout the world. And you even will have some atheists who are just going to believe, no, I can't accept it. Even if they're given the irrefutable proof in front of their eyes, there's still going to be a segment of people they're going to refuse to believe it. And that's just part of dealing with this great construct that we know as humanity. Am I right or wrong?
Right.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. For that reason alone, I really enjoyed Christopher Mellon's presentation. It was really good. So moving right along, let's go from Christopher Mellon to Karl Nell. And John, I know that you read you researched the Karl Nell presentation, and I got to watch Karl Nell's presentation, and he what his presentation was about was the UAPDA, or what's also become known as the Schumer-Rounds Amendment, that was folded into the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023 or 2024, I guess. Now, what's interesting to note about it is that all these videos took place again on November 17th and 18th. So exactly 3 months ago to the day of today that we're recording this podcast. And the UAPDA was not signed into law until December 22nd. So it was almost, it was a full month after this conference took place when Karl Nell made his remarks. So what he was not aware of as he made this presentation was that a lot of the aspects, unfortunately, of the Schumer Amendment, as it's become known, was gutted. And it was gutted by several members of the House of Representatives who, let's just say, I think there is a conflict of interest because these particular representatives, let's just say their biggest campaign contributors are from the defense contractor community. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Enough said, right? So, but Karl Nell did a really great breakdown of the UAPDA, or the Schumer Amendment, and Roger and I had dedicated an entire podcast episode to talking about the Schumer Amendment, and so there was, I guess, the best way to summarize the Schumer Amendment and Karl Nell's talk was that this was a historic bit of legislation. And even though it was gutted and a lot of the most important aspects, a lot of the most important provisions, you would say, of the bill were ultimately stripped, there were still several provisions of the bill that are significant that did get passed into law by President Biden on December 22nd. So let's just, John, let's just take a quick moment and talk about some of the things that stood out to you maybe in Karl Nell's presentation. What were some of the big takeaways that you had from it?
Well, I guess the first thing is when you hear him speak, this is a serious guy. He's got a lot of experience, and I think that alone is intriguing. I mean, all of these people are intriguing. You've got physicists and scientists and people of various backgrounds, but when you see that someone that comes from this particular arena with this much experience, that's interesting and intriguing. Like you said, a lot of the amendment was gutted in the end. But I think it's a sign that things are headed in the right direction. You know, that we can see more publicly who we're getting pushback from. You know, and of course it's going to be some of the defense contractors that, you know, who had maybe eminent domain concerns. You know, they don't want the government coming in and taking their technology or anything that they've developed, you know, based on allegedly receiving non-human technology, maybe. But I still think it's encouraging to see that, you know, we are having these conversations publicly. We're starting to see hearings on it. We have more whistleblowers coming out, which, and I think once they testify to, even if it's in closed hearings, in a skiff somewhere, you know, behind closed doors, the people that hear that are going to say, okay, we need to get to the bottom of this, and the public, you know, this is a lot of this should be public. I think that is an important aspect of all of this. Is too much is classified. Some stuff is being classified for legitimate reasons, but I think too much of it is being classified for illegitimate reasons. And I think that's something that they're recognizing. We need to get this stuff out into the public domain. I kind of lost my train of thought, but there was another point I wanted to make. But no, you get the gist of it. That's kind of that was my takeaway. Was that we're headed in the right direction, at least, even though we didn't get everything we wanted, but you know, step in the right direction.
And I would completely agree with that. I think some other key takeaways to remember about the Schumer amendment were, first of all, the amazing bicameral support that we had. And of course, for those that don't know what the term bicameral means, it means that it had the support of both houses of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And you had bipartisan, overwhelming bipartisan support, both Republican and Democrat. And while Roger and I don't like to stray into the topic of politics because it's such a divisive issue, this was one particular issue, the UAP, the UFO issue. It's an issue that has broad sweeping bipartisan and bicameral support still today in 2024, as it did last year in 2023 when the amendment was drafted by Senator Schumer, who of course is a very well-known liberal Democrat senator from my home state of New York, and Senator Rounds from South Dakota, who was a staunch conservative Republican. So you have just right there a great example of two politicians who are at the diametrically opposed ends of the political spectrum, as it were, but yet they were able to come together. And when the bill was watered down after it was passed, both Schumer and Rounds did a what was the term? Do they call it a soliloquy on the floor of the Senate, where they basically were having a conversation one with another at the same time on the Senate floor, and they were complimentary of each other, and they were talking about how determined they were that despite the line items that were taken out of the UAPDA or the Schumer Rounds amendment, despite those things being taken out, their intention was to make another attempt this current year in 2024 to try to get some of those provisions passed into legislation again. And that was a huge takeaway from that. Another significant thing about that amendment that Karl Nell talked about was that for the very first time in congressional history, if not the world, the United States Congress mentioned, and it's on public record, in that bill, the term non-human intelligence was used close to 20 times in that bill. And think about that, folks. Think about it and ponder that moment for just a quick second. Why would Senator Schumer, who is one of the most prominent members of Congress, irregardless of the party, and why would he allow that legislation to be drafted with that specific verbiage, knowing that if there was no substance to his claims, why would he risk his political reputation, his career, as it were, if there was no substance of any kind behind these allegations that whistleblowers such as David Grush have brought forth? So not only was the non-human intelligence mentioned in regards to these UFOs or UAPs, these craft that have allegedly been recovered by the United States government for the purpose of reverse engineering, but that also the occupants, these non-human entities, these non-human beings of a non-human origin, why would there be mention of them almost 20 times in this legislation if there wasn't something to it? And another thing to consider, which Karl Nell also pointed out in his presentation, I believe, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but he also pointed out how Senator Schumer is a member of the Gang of Eight.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was
And
thinking of before and forgot.
yeah,
That's exactly right.
So where that is relevant in this particular conversation is that another member of the Gang of Eight, Senator Marco Rubio, conservative Republican from Florida, both of them, both Rubio and Schumer, are members of the Gang of Eight, along with, I believe, Senator Gillibrand and several others as well. And so these 8 members of Congress actually were the first ones to be briefed on the information that David Grush has. And they presumably, as far as we know, were told everything and were shown everything, which even a lot of the House members, such as Tim Burchett, have not actually themselves seen. So the Gang of Eight, if there's anybody in Congress that knows and has seen some of the items that David Grush and these other whistleblowers have given sworn testimony about, the Gang of Eight is that group of people in Congress that have been privy to this information. So consider that. You have to take that into consideration when you consider the credibility of the language that was put into that bill. So that's another thing that for me is kind of like, okay, this just got real. When they put that language in the bill regarding non-human intelligence and the United States having possession of craft of an off-world origin or, things of that nature, they wouldn't just simply throw that in there willy-nilly, right? So I'll put this question out to all 3 of you. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a fair assessment, an accurate observation?
Well, definitely, because they have legal counsels that review every word of this legislation and things that go in to make sure they're basically trying to see if there's going to be any potential challenges to it, if such and such is going to try to get it thrown out or whatever. You hear things when Congress passes a certain law and then it's challenged and then the court overturns it, throws it out, says not constitutional, whatever. So yeah, they're going to be very careful with whatever they put in this. And a lot of what I think he said ties back to what David Grush said, in that the elected officials in our government seem like they're very much for getting this stuff out and seen about, because David Grush referred to the unelected part of our government, the government behind the government that is against it, is trying to keep this hid, and the senators and the congressmen are saying, hey, we're the government of this country, and we need to know everything that we're dealing with here. What we've been up against. So I think that's why there's a lot of bipartisan, support, not only the House but the Senate as well. I think that's very significant.
Absolutely, completely agree. Mae, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Ron. There's that technicality of saying non-human intelligence, because it could come back to bite you in the butt later on if something doesn't quite line up, and it's a technicality, and it definitely implies that they have data, again, that they're sitting on, that they can't explain, and they're not ready to disclose it yet because they don't know how to put it, which comes down to me wondering, is it a matter of hubris that we don't get it, therefore we're not sharing it with you? Or is it a matter of a protectiveness, saying we don't want anyone to panic? So, because I mean, look at what people will do with a little bit of information. I mean, South Texas can't handle it dropping below 30 degrees. That's it. No toilet paper and water at the store. What's going to happen if you give out this information and everyone panics? Then you try to say, no, that's not exactly what we meant. You know, I think that's important. That does imply something. And it's just a matter of waiting to see what it is. And like you said, the government behind the government, there's other people that the people that are writing this are going to be beholden to. And unfortunately, a lot of it does come down to money. You know, right. the people who are holding the contracts, you know, so.
Well, like,
yeah.
like the old adage goes, those that have power are afraid of losing it, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And clearly the allegations are, and these allegations certainly make perfect sense, that as Grush has said, the U.S. government several decades back moved this from being specifically under the auspices of the U.S. government and the military, and moved it into the private sector because of the Freedom of Information Act, you know,
Mhm.
FOIA.
Mhm.
And so whenever something is moved into the private sector, you cannot, it's not these private companies, these defense contractors are not beholden to the law regarding Freedom of Information Act disclosure. So I thought that was, to me, that made sense. And of course, you know, today we hear all about this thing called the deep state. As Ron said, the government within the government, and it doesn't really matter where you happen to sit on whether or not something like that actually exists. The fact of the matter is, there's an awful lot of, at the very least, anecdotal evidence that shows that there really have been these programs that existed, uh, oftentimes unknown to the vast majority of Congress, meaning there was really no congressional oversight on some of it, which is operating outside the bounds of constitutional law. And so that means that the law has been broken. So if the law has been broken, as has been alleged by David Grush, and there's now been at least 40 whistleblowers, many of whom have actual direct firsthand knowledge of these programs, meaning they actually worked in these crash retrieval programs, or they were in the reverse engineering portions of it, or they are the people that actually performed autopsies on these quote unquote non-human intelligence occupants that were in some of these craft. So um, keeping these things secret, and of course we mentioned that there is very much so such a thing as national security, and we do not want some secrets getting out to not only our foreign adversaries but to also our allies. There are some national secrets that must be maintained, and I'm not just talking about the secret formula to Coca-Cola or the spice combination for Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? So there are legitimate national secrets that there is a, you know, they need to remain secret for a reason. But there is also what has been called an overclassification problem within our government. In other words, there are things that are being classified that really there's no, you know, expedient reason um, why they should be classified, yet they're still being classified. So the Schumer Amendment was drafted in at least a portion of it to battle aspects of that, to battle the overclassification problem. And what's worth noting, as we'll wrap up here with Karl Nell's presentation, is that when the UAP DA was signed into law by President Biden on December 22nd, one of the provisions that was included that did get passed into law is the provision that states that the U.S. government and all of its agencies, including defense contractors, have 300 days to gather and disclose to the United States Congress any information regarding UFO crash retrievals, reverse engineering, anything pertaining to recovery of non-human intelligence, technology, or beings, and anything that is older than 25 years has to be declassified and made available to the public immediately on that 300th day. Now, that is significant because, quite obviously, a lot of the most famous UFO cases and legends, if you want to call them that, happened longer than 25 years ago. And of course, that would include incidents like Roswell, Kecksburg, Gulf Breeze, Cape Girardeau, McMinnville, Oregon. I mean, all these legendary UFO cases that happened, going clear back to 1947 was the date that the bill now says all those incidents have to be fully disclosed and declassified, every single document, to the American public after 300 days after December 22nd, 2023, which by my estimation puts it about right around October 19th or 20th, 2024. So interesting to note, let's say October 20th, 2024, what happens roughly 2 weeks after that?
Election.
Oh, election.
The
Yeah.
presidential election. You
Oh,
think
yeah.
that's a coincidence?
Mm.
There's a lot of people
Wow.
that are conjecturing and speculating that there may be what is popularly known as an October surprise that might be coming up around that time regarding just that kind of information. So whether or not there really is anything to these legacy UFO programs like Roswell, um, because of this legislation, all government agencies and government contractors that have any knowledge or any are in possession of any of these materials going back to incidents older than 25 years, that information has to be declassified and made available to the public within 300 days of that December 22nd, 2023. And now, worth noting is that the United States president, so President Biden, when that date rolls around, if he decides that it needs to be postponed, he can do that, but there is a limit on how long he can postpone it, and he has to provide the specific reason for why he is postponing the release of any of the records that he says cannot be released at that time. So there is a little bit of teeth that has been put behind the bill in that regard, so that's kind of nice to see, and that's definitely something to celebrate. Uh, and then we just have to, determine, okay, is there going to be, are we really going to get it? Because, you know, playing the devil's advocate here, President, I don't know if I forget who it was, if it was, I don't know if it was President Trump or Obama, but somebody signed into law that, and it could have even been Biden for all I know, that all of the Kennedy assassination documents were supposed to be released by a certain date. And that date came and went. And I think it was the CIA ultimately stepped in and said, no, we're not going to release, there's something like 1,000 additional pages. And the reason they gave was because the information contained in those documents would be, quote unquote, damaging to the American people and national security. So just because it's been passed into law doesn't mean that we're still going to get it. But the hope, cross our fingers, is still there that we'll be able to have access to some of that information. Any closing thoughts on that?
No, but now I'm thinking about Kennedy stuff again. Who knows? That might actually tie back into this conversation, though.
Yeah,
You never know. There are rumors, right?
very, very true. And there's actually a bit of a little anecdotal story that I've heard that indicates that there's some conspiracy theorists that do believe that one of the reasons that Kennedy was killed was that he apparently was planning on coming forward and declassifying some of the information that he knew at that time, back in 1963, about UFOs, and that is one of the things that could have contributed to his assassination if, very big if you buy into the fact that Oswald did not act alone. And
I've
I'm going
I've
to be
heard the same,
honest,
I've heard the same thing about.
I, yeah, I myself, I don't think Oswald acted alone if he was even the guy that did it, but that's just me. So, alrighty, well, thanks for the input on that, folks. Let's move on now to Dr. Avi Loeb. And then we'll have time to talk about one other one after Dr. Loeb. But Avi Loeb is a really well-known professor and astrophysicist based out of Harvard University, and he is the founder and the head of a project known as the Galileo Project. And Avi Loeb has been an extraordinarily outspoken advocate for getting to the bottom of this UAP phenomenon. And one of the things that's really worth noting, and I guess one of the reasons why he was invited to be a presenter, not only because he happens to sit on the board um, of the Soul Foundation, but last year, and it's been well known in the news, Avi Loeb conducted a expedition down to the South Pacific to retrieve the remnants of a meteorite that crashed in 2014 that he was convinced was an interstellar object. And by that, he means that it was not just a simple asteroid, meteor, whatever you want to call it, but that it was actually potentially something that was manufactured. In other words, artificial from somewhere else beyond our solar system that crashed into the ocean in the South Pacific. And so he sent out an expedition team last summer, and they did in fact recover several bits of material that are really something unique and special. Did any of you get a chance to watch his presentation?
I didn't watch his. I need to now, but I didn't watch his.
No worries.
I, I
So
didn't
so
watch it, but I'm familiar with Oumuamua and some of the other things he's working on a little
yeah,
bit.
cool. Well, yeah, Dr. Loeb, he was also, as you mentioned, John, a couple of years ago, there was that object that was in the news, and it was on all the major news media outlets. This strange object that was observed in our solar system, and it was observed by a observatory in Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken. And so they decided to name the object Oumuamua, which
Mhm.
is Hawaiian language for, I believe the translation is scout, if I'm or something along those lines. You'll have to forgive me. I don't speak fluent Hawaiian. I
Oh,
like
come
Hawaiian
on.
bread. I like Hawaiian rolls. But
Yes.
that's about the extent. I've never even been to Hawaii. How sad is that? But no,
We'll
this
go with you.
hey, let's all go. Sounds good to me. So we'll so yeah, this object called Oumuamua was one of the things that Avi Loeb he went through this great presentation about how he provided the details of why he felt this particular object was also an interstellar object,
Yeah.
and I think that came into our solar system around 2012, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on the date on that, but this meteorite that did crash into the ocean in 2014, they were able to gather, I think it was something on the order of like 50 bits of metal. And what they did is they took the ship out into the ocean, and they had these really powerful magnets. I'm guessing maybe neodymium magnets or something like that, that are super powerful. And they put them on like this sled, if you will, and they put the sled down to the floor of the sea, the seabed, and they dragged the sled along the surface of the well, not the surface, but the floor of the ocean with these magnets. And the hope was that these magnets would collect up any of these fragments, assuming that they were of a metallic composition. Well, the first major pass that they did yielded really kind of not any results at all. But then finally, they were able, on one of the drags that they got with this magnetic sled, they got a lot of material. And it's really fascinating to see it because these little things are like perfect spheres. They're like bits of, I think the way he described it, they're kind of like they were a molten metal that just, formed perfect spheres when they entered the ocean, when it, crashed into the ocean and presumably disintegrated, blew up, whatever you want to call it. And so these little spheres look so fascinating, to the extent that his daughter apparently asked him if he'd be willing to make her a necklace out of these little spheres that came from this interstellar object. So he said, of course, he told her, well, I'd like to, but they're so tiny. Apparently, they're like really, really super, super small. Like you'd barely be able to see them with the naked eye, if even. But they did the atomic analysis on these things, and sure enough, they were able to determine that there was some pretty extraordinary things uh, that these things were made out of, these little spheres. And it seems, by all accounts, to support Dr. Loeb's belief that this object was, not a rock. It was not part of a planetoid that broke off and ended up in the asteroid belt, and for whatever reason found its way to planet Earth and made it through our atmosphere, and then crashed and disintegrated before it hit the ocean floor. So he spent his time talking about this particular object, which was really fascinating. And to hear it coming from somebody of his prominence and his stature within the academic community carries a lot of weight, and it lends a lot of credence to this notion that it would make sense that if we, as Americans, there is so much space junk that we have put out there in the orbit of the Earth. Everything from satellites, which aren't necessarily junk, except for maybe some of the major media satellites, tisk tisk. But we got satellites, we've got other things that have ended up in Earth orbit from space shuttle missions and other missions from not just our country but other nations. Little bits of debris that are constantly circulating and orbiting around our Earth. So, furthermore, we have also sent probes out to other planets within our solar system. Obviously, we've got the rovers on Mars. We've sent the Viking uh, probes, as well as Voyager and Pioneer, that have actually gone, beyond the outer reaches of our solar system. So, if we are capable with our current technology of sending probes out into space within our own solar system and beyond our solar system, why would we not think that there's other civilizations out there? Just the sheer mathematic certainty that there are other intelligent races that are out there. Some of them may be way more advanced than we are technologically. Some of them may very well be at the same evolutionary stage that we are technologically in 2024. And some of them may be, primitive or significantly less developed technologically than we are. The point being is that if we can send stuff out into space, why would we assume that other civilizations would not be able to do the same? And would they not also send probes, and not even necessarily manned probes? Because in our case, Voyager and Pioneer, they were unmanned, right? They were, they're just machines, basically. So a lot of data came back from both Oumuamua and this meteorite that impacted in the ocean back in 2014. A lot of data points to the fact that that could be what these things were, is probe devices, scout devices, if you will, as Oumuamua is named. So really fascinating. And Dr. Loeb also talked about what we mentioned earlier in the episode tonight, is that there's people out there that want to be part of the conversation, that are productive, that want to really, they have curious minds. They believe that there is still plenty of discovery to be made. And then you have people that are jerks about it. There are people, some of whom are very prominent scientists. And again, I'm not going to mention his name, but he's very famous for poo-pooing the whole, notion of UFOs being here and intelligent civilizations contacting us because of the vast distances that would have to be traveled in the cosmos. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I think you know who I'm talking about. But so he talked about the importance of this should not be a topic that divides people. It's a topic that we should all be enthusiastic about, that we should be supportive of, because what a great thing to realize that we are not alone in this universe. We are not the only. We're not the only race of beings that can think and that can build things and that can go places. And that's a truly profound thing to stop and think about. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I've read quite a bit on Oumuamua, and you were talking about interstellar, and just kind of the putting that into more of a way of describing it is our solar system is basically a flat disk. So everything is said the planets orbit within what they call the ecliptic. So the planets are all, within a certain range of degrees of each other as far as, how far up or down in relative position. Something like Oumuamua is said to be very eccentric because they basically said it came in almost perpendicular to the plane of the solar system. So that's how they were able to determine that because of its orbital or its eccentricity. I can't say that word right, but eccentric path that it was interstellar. Now, some comets are more eccentric orbit. Even Pluto, the planet, is more eccentric. The dwarf planet Pluto, I guess I haven't quite demoted it in my mind yet,
It's
but
still a planet in my
it's still
mind
a
too.
planet. There you
So
go. Well, I grew up knowing that there was 9 planets, but anyway,
me too.
but Oumuamua is, almost its eccentricity is so high that it's coming in perpendicular to the plane of the solar system. So, that there says, okay, this is interstellar origin, because it's coming, in through, it's basically traveling through the solar system, from top to bottom.
Right. Absolutely. And it's, again, it like Dr. Lowe said in his presentation, it's not really that much of a stretch of the imagination, if you even want to, and I hate to use that term in this context of imagination, but it's really not that much of a stretch to think that other civilizations out there would send probe craft or scout craft that are piloted by AI or something that we would, compare to AI or some other mechanical manufactured, device of some kind, and do you guys agree with that?
Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, right on. I mean, if it makes sense to a Broncos fan, right?
Ooh.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to Dr. Timothy Gallaudet, who was a retired rear admiral within the U.S. Navy and is also a PhD. And anybody get to watch Tim's video?
I
Ron, I
did.
know you did.
I really enjoyed his. Really did.
Tell us what some of your thoughts are on Tim's video, real quick.
Well, I mean, just simple fact that he's a retired admiral. I mean, this guy's, you take him very serious when he talks. I mean, this is a very no nonsense kind of guy. He retired, then he led NOAA. So I mean, he's got some serious clout, and some of the things that he talked about, especially with the Tic Tac incident, just kind of like wow, because he said, well, we were out there, went out there and was dealing with this thing, all of us, were ready to help these pilots out, because of the safety issues or whatnot with dealing with these with this craft that they were seeing, and then all of a sudden, they were told, the next day they come in, their computers are wiped, they have no information, it was all taken away from them, and this is a retired admiral, saying this, and if you
Right.
can't take this guy serious, you can't take anybody serious. I mean, I really enjoyed his talk, just hearing it from that perspective.
I completely agree. And another thing, he worked for NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric administration. Is that what NOAA stands for? So,
Yep.
something
Mhm.
along those lines. So he is still very actively involved in things that are of great value and import to not just Americans but to the rest of the planet. So this is a guy that is what I would definitely call a subject matter expert. And like you said, Ron, he was a rear admiral with the Navy. That's not just, some insignificant, pissant type of a rank within the Navy. That's a fairly high ranking position. So anything that he says from his own personal experience should be taken very seriously. And like you said, I definitely took great interest in what he had to say. And the things that he said just added greater weight and credibility to what we have already talked about with some of the other presenters at the Soul Foundation. And I really enjoyed Tim's video. John, did you get a chance to watch it at all?
No, I didn't watch it, but I agree with everything you all just said. I mean, this is a very serious individual, right? These aren't lightweights. This is
Right.
a former rear admiral of the Navy. This is someone who you should listen to. This isn't some, crank, just.
He's not some
These are
video game
the-
designer
Right.
or game coder, right?
I can't imagine who you're referring to there. Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, you listen to that guy, you can listen to someone else who I guess I shouldn't mention either. But then, yeah, you've got the likes of a Rear Admiral or a Karl Nell, or
Yeah.
these are serious people with serious backgrounds that we should take seriously. It's that simple. It's like, even if you are predisposed not to believe some of the things you're hearing, you should listen to these people. You can't just immediately discount it because of the subject matter. People need to start paying attention and listen to what these guys are saying. It's that simple.
Completely and totally agree. Mae,
Yeah.
did you get a chance to watch any, or do you know who Tim is at all?
Yeah, I watched his. I found it very fascinating. Unfortunately, because I tend to be a visual learner, I don't remember a whole lot. But when Ron started talking, I was like, okay, yeah, I remember that. One of the things that he had said that struck me was talking about the diversity in the ocean and how we have hardly any of that figured out. So, there's so much that we don't know about. So we have to accept that there's more there than we're even aware of, even on our own planet. So if it's possible that there is something, further dimensional, further out in space, somewhere else, then yeah, it just makes sense, given that we haven't been able to catalog everything in our own ocean. I'm trying to remember some of the other things, but yeah, part of the credibility of him being a rear admiral working for NOAA. Yeah, I was like peeking over. I was looking at my phone. I'm like, okay, YouTube says I watched that video. Let me remember. Oh yeah, he's the guy that talked about the Japanese luxury toilets. But
Right.
but yeah, and it's one of those things that I have to go back and watch it again, and it helps when I take notes on stuff, because then I completely forget about it. But one of the things that when you had mentioned about the little metal balls, it made me think of, I listened to a documentary the other day, and they were talking about the tower. It's further out east. It was Revolutionary War. They were having to make ammunition, and so the tower is you drop the molten lead from the top, and it gets down to the bottom, and it's a ball. So that's what that made me think of when you talk about these little metal balls, perfectly formed spheres, that it's the same concept. This molten metal is coming in because something's burning up in the atmosphere and liquefying, and it hits the water, and it hits the speed it does, and boom, a little ball forms. And that made me curious when they tested. You talked about they tested the elements in there. It made me also wonder, after listening to Garry Nolan's talk, about the uniformity of those. Is there anything that they've said? I'll have to go and listen to that one too. Have they said that like all of those were of a uniform makeup, or was there any variation in the elements?
The one takeaway, particularly from Dr. Nolan's presentation, was there appears to be evidence from the atomic analysis that Dr. Nolan did. That's kind of one of his
Mhm.
areas of specialty with the material that he recovered from Council Bluffs, Iowa, and there was another one right off Ubatuba in Brazil,
Ubatuba.
where a craft exploded over a beach in Brazil. Ubatuba, Brazil. That's a fun word to say. Ubatuba.
Yeah, you like saying that, don't you?
We should make a song, Mae.
I was gonna say, it'd be a good song title.
Right, John, you can lay down some rhythm guitar for us on that.
I'll sing bass.
There you go. That works. You play the tuba, right? Anyhow, we digress. But no, to your question, Mae, Dr. Nolan was of the belief that one thing that those samples showed was that there appeared to be an industrial process of some kind involved. In other words, there was not any known natural process that would have caused the isotopes on some of these things to not only have formed, but also there seems to be manipulation of isotopes. And in the case of Ubatuba and Council, well, particularly Ubatuba, which happened in 1957, I think, nobody back in 1957 was manipulating isotopes for anything
Yeah.
other than the creation of atomic weapons. And, obviously there's other isotopes that we use to do medical imaging for x-rays, not necessarily MRIs, but special tomographies and things like that. So his takeaway was that there was definitely a lot of things going on that couldn't be accounted for. There weren't necessarily any exotic isotopes going on with some of the samples that he observed, but there were signs of there being extremely precise
Yeah.
points of manufacturing and the purities of elements, particularly with silicon and
Silicon.
wasn't
It was zinc and
zinc, yes,
manganese or something like that.
Manganese, I
magnesium.
thought I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so there were consistencies with the purities, the extreme purities that typically aren't even found in nature, if I understood correctly. And again, I'm not a physicist. I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not, I'm a Raiders fan. I'm not a smart guy, right? So,
He,
Hey, I
he
didn't
showed,
say it.
he showed a scan that
John, I saved you some work, right? Sorry
he
about
he listed a bunch of showed all the different tests that he ran on that, and which it was amazing. But the one that he used the most, and it showed like a graph of the two elements, and he said that these have such just a specific line that they meet. That's almost, he said, it's like atoms to atoms, and
Right.
it's so that process that's just was just that just kind of blew me away when he said that, because we can't do anything like that. None of the industrial things that we make with different elements, nothing that precise.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So we've got about 10 minutes left to wrap things up here. And so what I want to move on to next is Dr. Jacques Vallee. And we'll just real quickly talk about him. And Ron, I know that you watched his video and I watched it as well. And
Yep.
for those who don't know, Dr. Jacques Vallee is what we would call one of the original ufologists. He goes back years and decades, back to when ufology was probably even coined as a term, was when Dr. Vallee got into things. And those of you that may have seen Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the character of Dr. Lacombe, who was played by famous French director Francois Truffaut. He's the French-speaking character in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He was actually the real-life inspiration for that character was Dr. Jacques Vallee. So he's a guy who's been around long enough to really know a lot. He's what we would call an OG in the modern vernacular, you would say. So, so Dr. Vallee, just to show you some of the things that he's done, he was who provided Garry Nolan with the UFO, the alleged UFO materials that he did the atomic analysis on and has just made public. And another cool thing that I mentioned about Garry Nolan was that one of the things in Garry Nolan's presentation was he showed actual photos from the scene of where these alleged UFO materials were retrieved. And you can actually see in this one that happened in Council Bluffs, Iowa in 1977, where multiple eyewitnesses witnessed this molten material kind of drip off, if you will, a UFO, a classic flying saucer shaped UFO. And so there's a great photograph of this material in what appears to be liquid metal form, um, pooled on the ground and cooling off. And that's where the material came from that Dr. Vallee came in possession of and ultimately sent off to Dr. Garry Nolan for the atomic analysis. So there was some really fascinating, not just actual elemental and atomic data, but there were some great photographs that were shown um, of these materials that allegedly came from UFOs. So, but Dr. Vallee is just such an amazing resource, and he's a PhD, and he splits his time between Paris and San Francisco, I believe, is where he lives these days. But still, a valid and very vital contributor to legitimate scientific data, and what an encyclopedia of knowledge his mind is when it comes to this particular topic. I mean, he is absolutely one of our greatest resources in getting to the bottom of figuring out this mystery. And I mean, I just his presentation just blew me away. How about you, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, just really, just hearing him talk, he's been involved with this for, I think, 65 years, he said,
That sounds about
which,
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm 55, and that's 10 years longer than I've been alive. So, but, some of the things he said that really, the one thing he said that really stuck with me, and he said, 98% of what we've seen, we might be able to explain, or we can explain, but it's the 2% that we can't that will kill us. And that just kind of, I was like, wow, that's
Yeah.
that's a phrase I want to borrow one day for something. But yeah, just his how he's been involved with this since the inception, when everybody basically said him and the other guys that he did it with were a bunch of crackpots. They're not. They're serious guys. They're PhDs. They all, a bunch of them taught at Stanford there, where the conference was being held at. And he showed a picture of them, and I was just really, this guy's been with it for the long haul. I mean, just that really impressed me.
Absolutely. May, did you get a chance to watch his, or do you know
I
anything about him?
didn't. No, I
Okay.
didn't get to watch his.
Okay. John, did you get a chance
I
to
did
watch his?
watch it. I did
What
watch it.
what were your thoughts?
Well, it's Jacques Vallee, man.
Right,
You
right.
beat me to it. I was
He's
like,
a celebrity.
he's the OG. He is the OG. And a tangential note in the the picture he showed of the I think Ron just mentioned it, the photo of the different people in his team way back when. One of them was Doctor, I think he's Doctor, but Bruce Maccabee, an
Right.
optical, physicist, I think, or laser physicist. I can't remember, but he
Yeah.
does a lot of analysis of videos and photos, and I've been used to follow his work as well. So, I mean, these
Right.
guys, this harkens back to the conversation earlier about this is what skeptics should be.
Mhm.
These are like real scientists following data and just going where the data leads. They're not leaping to any crazy conclusions. And honestly, I think that's one of the things I appreciate about Jacques Vallée is, especially if you've read, I think his books, the Dimensions series, it's Dimensions, Revelations, and one other one, I can't think of the name of it. But
Passport
I
to
think,
Magonia. That's another good
yeah,
one.
those books, I think those should be, if you're interested in this, those are required reading. Those and
Yep.
a couple
Completely
of
agree.
John Keel's books. But I mean, these are like, okay, you're new to the field, here, read these books. But I think Yeah, I can't remember much specifically that I wanted to comment on other than that he's just another very serious person. You know, people, um, they try to paint him as a quack for no reason other than he has spent his career focusing on this topic, right? But he's
Right.
not a quack. He is a very serious individual, putting as many scientific resources as he can afford and the people around him can afford. You know, they're bringing that to bear on this problem. And um, I think what I take away from him is that he's one of those that makes me think we know less about this than we think we do. You know, some of us
Right.
think the government knows a lot about it. And then I think I read some of his stuff and I'm like, you know what? Maybe we don't really know much about this.
Yeah. The more we learn, the less we know, right?
I think it is that sort of situation,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah.
I completely agree. Jacques Vallee is definitely somebody that his work should be studied, and if you have the means to read his books, the titles that John mentioned, plus the one that I mentioned, Passport to Magonia, are just some of the many books that Dr. Vallee has written over the years that are really excellent, unparalleled resources, if you will, for learning more about the history of this crazy world of UFOs and UAPs. So to wrap things up, folks, again, just the Soul Foundation. Go to the YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the below in the comments in the description. I'll put a link to the YouTube channel for the Soul Foundation. I do recommend that you watch the videos if you haven't had a chance to. There's truly a gold mine of information that's in there, and some of this stuff will literally uh, blow you away. I mean, my jaw dropped to the floor many times during several of the presentations, like, oh my gosh. And so the fact that this information, the fact that this topic is finally being mainstreamed and destigmatized, that's the whole reason why the Soul of the Unexplained exists. It's the whole reason that Roger and I started doing this podcast series, was to destigmatize and to make people less afraid of wanting to talk about these mysteries, and especially if you're an experiencer. And we've talked about the difference between being a believer in the unknown and being an experiencer in the unknown. And as I've mentioned before, I myself have never personally seen a UFO, but I have had other things that I've experienced. And once you cross that threshold of actually having experience something, it changes you forever. It changes your perception, your perspective. It changes you forever. You can never go back to being the person that you were prior to the time that you experienced whatever it was that you saw, that you felt, or that you experienced. And so to all the people out there that have experienced something, whether it was a UFO sighting or whether you're somebody who has seen a Sasquatch or a shadow being or anything that defies explanation, that is of an unexplained or uh, I hate to use the term paranormal, because paranormal is just simply science that we don't understand yet. So, but if you've ever experienced that, just know that you're not alone. And even if you're not an experiencer, if you believe, you have an ally in me and Roger and so many other people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan and supporter of the Skinwalker Ranch Insider Group. And every chance I do one of these episodes, you guys know I always promote and talk my fool head off about how much I love being a Skinwalker Ranch insider. And John, you're a fellow insider as well, and I know that you get as much value from it as I do. And it was great to meet John at Phenomicon last year. And so Skinwalker Ranch is a subject and a field. The research that they're doing out there is just one of the things that I'm extremely interested and passionate about. And so all these things just kind of coalesce into this big mystery, this big puzzle, if you will. And I think we're just in the beginning stages of getting of finding out what some of the pieces of this puzzle are, to help us maybe get a little further along down the road and and figuring out some of these mysteries. And for all we know, maybe some of these mysteries aren't meant for us to figure out in our lifetime. But I do believe, I do have a very strong, deeply held conviction that we will get closer to finding out what some of those truths are. And I think we're on the precipice of some very monumental announcements, some very monumental events that we're going to find out about. And for me anyway, it's a very exciting time to be alive. I love the fact that we we saw these things like the congressional hearings happen last year with David Grush. I'm excited about the additional hearings that are going to happen this year. I'm excited about so many things. I'm excited about the upcoming season of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, season 5. Cannot wait for that to get here. And I know that Mae, I know that you're a fan of that as well. So there's so much exciting stuff on the horizon. And it's truly an exciting time to be alive. And yes, there's a lot of opposition. There's a lot of naysayers. There's a lot of people that want to piss on the parade, as they say. But just remember that always take the high road and don't get baited into those kind of conversations, because the people that want to do that cast aspersions on it and that like to tear people down for believing in something greater than themselves, um, don't let that harp on you too much. Just know that you're not alone, that there's other people out there that share the same interests, the same convictions, the same passion. And a lot of times, if you're an experiencer, there's a lot of people out there that have experienced some of the same extraordinary, unexplainable things that have happened to you as well. You're not alone, and that's something that I just always want to reemphasize every time I get near a microphone. So with that, folks, I'll let all three of you here just have a quick moment to add your final thoughts, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So we'll start with you, John. I'll give you a chance to wrap up any closing comments and
Well,
remarks you have.
I just want to thank you for asking me to come on board. This is my first time on any type of podcast, so this was an interesting
It won't be the
experience, and
last, I guarantee. I
thoroughly
definitely want
enjoyed
to have
it.
you back.
I hope so. But yeah, this was wonderful, and it was great to meet Ron and Mae and get a chance to talk about some of these things. And
Wonderful.
I'm really looking forward to this season of Skinwalker Ranch as well. I think it's going to be pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to blow our minds more than last season. And also, I'm looking forward to seeing you again at Phenomicon. So
Right on. Awesome. Ron, how about you?
Likewise, I'm just thank you for giving me the chance to be on here. I think this is my second episode of the podcast I've been on, so definitely appreciate that. And I've had a fun time, and getting to see you all and getting to meet you, John. And I look forward to keep learning about this stuff. Like Jim said, I'm just excited for what we might find out this year. Some of the things that might come out. So really just look forward to that, and hopefully be back on some point in the future.
Excellent. Thanks, Ron. Mae, how about you?
Well, I'm just really glad you were able to do this. I'm glad you invited me, and I was really happy to see you vertical. And so looking forward to more of that. And yeah, I think that as we are eased into disclosure, I think that it will be easier for more people to be a little bit more open as they see the nature of the data that's coming out, as they see the experts that are supporting it, that are looking at it. And I think that gradual will be good, because that'll give me plenty of time to stockpile my own toilet paper and bottled water before they drop the big bombs. And but yeah, I think that's just it's very fascinating to me, and that's the big thing, is that it's easing people into it, is changing minds, or helping them accept things. And then of course, especially the people who have always been ostracized for sharing their experiences, to me is a pretty important thing. So I'm glad you do this.
Well, thank you. And a very sincere, heartfelt thank you to each of you. John, absolute pleasure to have you as a guest on the podcast. And I'm honored the fact that we were your first podcast. So, and
Yeah.
like I said, this will not be the last time we'll call upon you. I'd love to have you join us again for another podcast sometime on down the road. And Ron, always great to have you on. Loved having you on the first time. This time was even better. You're such a wonderful Your perspectives that you offer are just wonderful. You're one of my favorite people on planet Earth, truly, and your taste in music is just simply impeccable. I just got to say that. And Mae, same for you. Just thank you so much for taking the time to be on tonight. Please pass along my thanks to your wonderful husband Kevin, who is a Skinwalker Ranch insider, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
So
Yep, he is. Yep.
so right on, and so thank you for everything that you do and for your wonderful support. Great to have you on for you're a three-timer now on the Soul of the Unexplained. So truly a pleasure and an honor to have all three of you join us. Folks, if you like the content that we had on tonight's episode, then please hit that subscribe button down below there that you see. And if you like the content, we'd love to have you follow us. We also have a page on Facebook, The Soul of the Unexplained. Again, that's SOL. And not just because Roger and I are always SOL, shit out of luck on stuff, but well, sometimes it applies, right? That's just life. But and of course, hit the notification bell every time we post new content. You'll be notified if you hit that notification bell as well. In the meantime, though, folks, please thank you. Thanks once again for watching the four of us talk about this wonderful conference that happened for the Soul Foundation. And I would also encourage you to follow the Soul Foundation on YouTube and elsewhere on social media. And again, major thanks and gratitude and appreciation to Dr. Garry Nolan, Peter Scoffish, to Christopher Mellon, Diana Walsh-Pasulka, Dr. Kevin Knuth, Christopher Mellon, and all the presenters at the Soul Foundation, as well as some other prominent folks such as Dr. Travis Taylor, Jay Stratton, Lou Elizondo, and so many others that are doing everything they can. David Grush, I can't forget him, to move this whole topic forward and to help us figure out some of these mysteries that are out there regarding this UFO/UAP phenomenon. Thanks again, folks. We'll be back very soon, Roger and I. And again, we want to wish Roger a speedy recovery and can't wait to have him back. We've got some more exciting stuff coming your way for the Soul of the Unexplained. But for now, folks, thanks again, and we will see you soon. See ya.